promised myself that I was going to clean up. My sister lived there. I thought everything was going to get great. And ultimately, here I am involved with people, and I become the organizer of disorganized crime because I knew how to do it. And ultimately, this woman who was a DEA agent arrested me twice. And I remember her looking at me in the eyes on my second arrest, and she said, "I know who you are." And I said, "Well, I'm glad you do, because I don't." But she looked at me and she said, "There's no reason you should be hanging around these people. You're a doctor, you're educated," and she started going on, giving me a list of things, of the accomplishments I'd had in my life. This is a drug enforcement agent. And she said to me, "When you're ready to get out of this life, give me a call." And I thought to myself, I'll keep that number in case I ever get in trouble. Maybe she could get me out of trouble, even though she'd arrested me twice. But a series of events happened that one on over a night period, and the FBI were involved, and I was staying in these makeshift hotel apartments, and we were producing meth now in bathtubs, not in labs. And a bunch of stuff happened, and one morning I picked up the phone and I called her, and I said I want out of this world. I want out of the drug world. And about 45 minutes later, there's a knock on my sister's door. My sister had kicked me out. I was living on the street at this time, but for some reason I went back to her that night and said, "Can I please sleep at your house tonight?" And that there was a knock on the door, and of course I was scared to answer it. She was at work, her daughter was at school, her husband was at work, and my phone rang and they said, "Can you please come and answer the door?" And I said, "I'm not at home, sir." And they said, "Well, the dog keeps running up and down the stairs and looking down the stairs, so we know that you're downstairs. So can you please come and answer the door?" And I called my sister and I said, "They're here to get me. I'm in big trouble now." And it was the district attorney. And ultimately, the end of my story was that the FBI and the DEA had been following me and everybody I was involved in, and they wanted me to testify to the grand jury about everything I knew about the production of methamphetamine and identity theft. So when you brought up fraud, someone brought up fraud and meth, I thought, oh, what am I doing here tonight? This is not okay. Are they talking about me? Anyway, so the guy came up, and he was a district attorney, actually, and I ended up, my dad flew down to Denver, and he said, "You're doing whatever those people want." And I said, "They'll kill me. If I testify to the grand jury, the people I know will kill me." And my dad said, "If you want any part of this family ever again, you're going to do what they want." And I stayed in Denver for 6 more weeks, testified, and then I got in that U-Haul and I came home. Well, my story is such, and I think important, not only the darkness of my story, and more in what I do today. And I'm a firm believer in complete transformation. So my life has taken on a different angle today, and I spent the last 18 years doing what I can to save the lives of people around me, and most importantly, working with their families. Because addiction, as we all hear every day on the news, is a real thing. And it's not only a real thing on Portage and Main, and it's not only a real thing in the North End, it's a real thing across our city and our province and across the world. And I often have the opportunity to speak internationally on the subject now. In 10 minutes I can't tell you what I say, but the truth is that I get to speak about this on an international level about what the real problem is. The real problem is disconnection, and the real answer is connection. And how do we start connecting generations of people that ultimately are struggling with addiction and mental health? They go hand in hand. One does not go without the other, and we're not treating people appropriately to be able to get them the transformation and the connection they need. And so my goals have become in my life to be able to speak anywhere I can, really around the fact that people can recover, and ultimately what the disease of addiction looks like. Because it doesn't look like what we all think it looks like, and it starts way before our first drug and our first drink. And that's where I try to work. I try to work with families in my life and try and get them to the place where we can get their young children to start understanding what connection looks like. Because connecting to soul, addiction is really cancer of the soul, and connecting your soul to the outside world is really the answer when it comes to treating addiction. So ultimately, that became my goal, and like I said, I do a lot of work in that area. In that time, my mentor has passed, and I wasn't really going to talk about this, but someone suggested I did, and I'll just briefly talk about some of the things that he taught me, and some of the things that were really important. He was 93 years old, and I thought he was going to drop dead. And I used to I used to run to his house and I had the key and I thought I'd find him dead, and ultimately he got diagnosed with cancer. And so I got to spend about 4 months with him. And ultimately, the recovery from addiction is all spiritual. It's a mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual problem with really only a spiritual answer. And I would get to his house in that time that he was dying, and he'd be watching the TV, and the TV would be on the weather station on silent, so there was no music. And he'd be looking at stuff, and he'd point out to me, he'd say, you know, Ian, do you know there's one more minute of daylight today? And I'd say, yeah, so? Like, I wouldn't say that, because I would never be that disrespectful, but I'd be, okay, Tom, that's very nice. And then I'd go back the next day, and he'd be watching the same weather channel, and he'd say to me, you know, there's 2 more minutes of daylight today. And I'd say, that's really nice, you know. Finally, I had the nerve, years later, and in the time that he was dying, to say, so what if there's 1 more minute of daylight? And he said to me, if you ever doubt the power of a creator or of something greater in our lives that's really responsible for everything we do in life, you have another thing coming. And I knew exactly what he meant at that moment in time. That 1 more minute of daylight happens every year at the same time, at the exact same time, every year on the exact same date. And we don't question that. And how did that happen, and where did that come from? He would also say to me, when you sleep, who takes care of you? And he would talk physiologically about our body and what would happen. When you go to sleep, and you don't worry about anything. You just worry about waking up, you know. And those are things that I would never have thought about. But he really gave me some direction in understanding that stuff. His wife had died 25 years earlier, and so he would tell me every day that she'd show up and she'd sit in this chair, and they would talk. And I thought, Tom, you're crazy. Like, your wife comes back every year, 25 years, every single day to talk to you after she's died. And he went on, every day he would tell me the same thing. And as he was dying, he said to me, you know, we're going to communicate when I pass. And it was very interesting for me because he was a very spiritual being and he completely believed in the spirit. And I don't know if any of you, well, some of you obviously have been around people dying, but when you're around people dying, they start disconnecting from the world. And as he was dying, he actually had a connection to know how much longer his body was going to last. He'd say to me, I'm about 10 days away from dying, Ian. And I'd say to him, how do you know that? Anyway, he said that we were going to connect once he died, just like he spoke to his wife. And through a series of events and funny stories, I ultimately connected to him first through a medium. I was at the Golden Globe Awards as a guest, and I was in the gifting room where all the stars come to get their swag. And I'm just walking around, looking around in amazement at the stars. And this woman walks up to me out of the blue and said, who's Tom? And I said to her, who are you? What do you mean, who's Tom? And she said to me, there's a gentleman, and she started listing things about him that you really only, well, you would know if you knew him. He played hockey in Los Angeles. He was this guy that was bigger than life. He did this, he did that. And then she started telling me things about me that only he knew. And she said, my name is so-and-so, I'm a medium, and I was just channeled to speak with you about Tom. And that happened that time, and I thought, oh great, now he's coming to talk to me. After he died, I would sit there, I don't know why, in the shower. But I would sit in the shower, and I'd think that he was going to come and speak to me while I was in the shower. And he never did. That was the first time he came to me, and then he came to me another time through another medium. And since then, I've studied to be a medium, and I have conversations with this spiritual being, this spiritual man, every day of my life. So that's an incredible gift that I've gotten from sobriety. Recovery is more than just quitting drugs and alcohol. It's really enlightening our spirits. And most important, 2 things, love and self-sacrifice. And those are the 2 things that if you do in life, you will always have a better life, and you will have the capacity to recover and help others find their lives. So thanks.